You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast.
I am a co-founder and an executive director at ARTSPLIT, which is an art technology startup. So it does also tell you that there is space for also exposing African collectors to a broader range of African works and creating the connection for them. A lot of people have their eyes on Africa. People want to experience this culture. So it is a very interesting space to be in. You can experience the stories that each of these artists in the different times they've existed are trying to put across. There is so much diversity and beauty right now in the African art space.
Stay tuned as we bring you inspiring people who are unlocking Africa's economic potential. You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast with your host, Tessa Adamu.
Welcome to the Unlocking Africa podcast, where we find amazing people who are doing amazing things to unlock Africa's economic potential. Today, we have another special guest, Onyinye Anyaegbu, who is Executive Director at ARTSPLIT, which is an art trading technology company driven by one common goal: to enhance the investment status of African art by allowing users to co-own rare and valuable artwork. Welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me. I am good, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. I'm good. It's great to have you on the podcast today. I've been looking forward to today's conversation because you have a very unique business, which is of huge interest to me. So it's great to have you on the podcast, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. Before we start, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about yourself.
So I'm Onyinye Anyaegbu. I am a co-founder and an executive director at ARTSPLIT, which is an art technology startup that went live earlier this year in April. I live in London. I'm a mom of two. And I'm from Nigeria originally, but my family and I live in London now. But I guess that's me in the background.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. You've given us a nice summary in terms of who you are, what you do, your background. Tell us a little bit about ARTSPLIT, how the company started, what is the idea behind it, and what you hope to achieve.
Oh, yeah. Well, ARTSPLIT is... I would say is my big aha moment, right?
Brilliant.
I think before now I've been in FMCG and pharmaceuticals, so this is really different from my background career wise. I got the opportunity to come into this process when it was still at a conversational stage and trying to put together what it would look like as a business and taking it from there. In the simplest way of me explaining it, we're an art technology company that makes it possible for people to co-own valuable artworks, as well as create access to a space that is quite limited because of the entry value of this kind of works. So you're looking at works that are, say, $100,000 or $50,000 and even sometimes upwards, which we know very few people can afford,
Yes.
whether it's for the joy and for the love of it, or even leveraging it as an alternative investment. So our platform makes it possible through the true co-ownership to get groups of people to bid and have access to a work and own it and earn from that work potentially, as well as give them the opportunity to lease the work and have physical custody for that work for a period of time. So really balancing the love of art with as well the power of alternative investment within the space of art.
Amazing. As you mentioned, ARTSPLIT is or was your big aha moment. It's a very unique concept and idea, one that I really like and extremely interested in. You've given people the opportunity to co-own pieces of art, almost democratizing the ownership of art. So if we kind of step back outside of the technology and look at African art per se, where do we start? Where are we at the moment?
We're at an interesting space right now within African art, right? And this is all forms of art. If you think about it, whether it is paintings and sculptures or photography or even music, a lot of people have their eyes on Africa. People want to experience this culture. So it is a very interesting space to be in, specifically for the art that we make available within our platform. We are at a space where internationally there is recognition of the immense potential in the works that are coming up or in the skill sets of artists, both previous masters and upcoming masters within the African art space. So you can see that even reflecting in some of the big auction houses creating African departments focused on African works and auctions focused only on African works because there's a lot of appetite for it. And it's a big market. The art market is over $200 billion and African is almost $14 billion within that space. So there are big numbers that run behind the art space. And it's good to see African art start getting its space. There's still a lot of work to do in terms of how these works are valued with their peers from other European countries or other Western countries. But so far, I would say the attention is there. The desire to truly expand the space is there. And we're seeing more and more collectors actually coming out from Africa. So that's a really good thing as well.
Fantastic. You touched on quite a few key points there in terms of we are at a interesting point of time with regards to African art, and there is still a lot of work to do and a lot of opportunity. So if we look at African art in terms of the old and the new, what are the significant differences that we're seeing between what has come previously to what is currently happening at the moment?
The thing about art is that art is quite unique. An artist has something to express, hence the uniqueness of art. And sometimes they might be within, I would say, a grouping of expression. So maybe like stills or portraitures or sculptures or whatever it is. But the individuality of the artist is what makes that art quite valuable. The way they tell their story, the way they express what it is they're trying to. So I wouldn't say there is a difference. I would just say that you can experience the stories that each of these artists in the different times they've existed are trying to put across. And you would expect it to be different because they're living different lives now, right? If you think about a Benewon who had the opportunity to actually create a sculpture of the late Queen Elizabeth, his lifetime, he experienced differently from today, who you see Anishak in Ghana, who is experiencing life differently today in this time and in this present age. So I would say for me, the way I look at it is more of the difference in expression more than just the difference in the artworks themselves. So obviously they all have different mediums and different ways that makes a work unique to them. But I think more importantly is the story they're telling. And it's that expression of their own truth within their reality.
So you did mention the individuality of the art is what creates the value, and previously you mentioned that African art industry is valued at around $14 billion, is it?
Yes, around that.
So do you believe that African art is fairly valued, or is that quite a subjective question?
It's an interesting question, and I'm sure it is subjective as well, because everyone could have their own thoughts about it. So one of the things I found quite fascinating coming into the art space, and I am by no means an expert, so it's a big learning curve for me as well, is trying to understand, how do you value art, right?
Yes.
How do you decide this artwork is worth this? And the biggest takeaway for me is that value is placed on the art by who is willing to buy it more than anything. So if an artist who used to like sell $10,000 worth of art goes into an auction and someone decides to bid because they love that work and keeps bidding and it goes all the way to 100,000, it changes the point entry for that artist automatically because now the works are selling at that amount. So at one extreme end of it is the value that is placed on the work, right? We say that is the value we want to put on it. Hence, we would pay that much for that work. But also on the other part of it is the things I see that also come in terms of the value of a work is also the uniqueness of the artist. A lot of these works that you see that are quite expensive and of high value, there's a piece of the artist's story that truly connects with people, that creates an additional layer of value to that work, if that makes sense. And then you have all the other pieces around the way the artists have performed over time, those categories of mediums of art, and just the value that's been placed on other similar kind of works within those same groupings. And so there's so many things I think that obviously contribute to the value of an artist, right?
Yes.
And right now, even in today's world, the way the artist is even managed by whoever they're signed up to, right? Because that also plays a big part in the influence that kind of goes out into the world around the artist and the works and their story, and being able to really draw that connection with collectors or with buyers. So there's so many things that kind of fall into that space. But what I see from being in this space for as long as I've been is that I feel African art isn't yet valued to its full potential. And obviously, there are different reasons for that. If you think about structure, the African art market is not as structured as some of the European markets, Western markets. And that's okay. They've started the long run in that kind of framework and structural space before us, but we're definitely getting there. Also, if you think about who controls the market, and that obviously affects where value has stemmed from and how that looks like. So it's exciting to see that we are having more African collectors and more Africans that are interested in African works, that are now having the kind of income that can allow them to obviously purchase those works outrightly and start giving value to African works, because they obviously are paying more for these works. But also, that's why we're also passionate about ARTSPLIT, because now it creates an opportunity for more people to now have the opportunity to value these works by bidding and saying, this is how much I would pay for a split. I may not be able to afford the whole work, but once you break it down into 100,000 splits, I can afford to pay $1, $2 for a split and value it at that. And when you do that collective valuation of buying in splits, you pull that back together, you see a work that goes in for like $10,000 in our auctions ends up coming out of the auction at $15,000 or at $16,000, because people have valued it more than it went into the market, and they've been able to contribute and access it at a lower entry point than they probably would have if they had to buy it whole. And all these things are part of the data points that then feeds into the valuation of that artist and that work going forward. Because it's once you buy a work, you set a value for the work. And then you set a value for the artist, and it keeps going from there.
Amazing. Thank you for that. You mentioned in the early days, one thing you try to understand is how to value art. So at ARTSPLIT, is there a process that you use to set, say, an expectation or a benchmark in terms of what you anticipate a piece of artwork will sell for?
Yeah, so I think that the first thing we were very clear on and we aligned on is, let's not pretend to be the experts when we are not, right? We are creating this opportunity, so let's use the experts where possible to truly bring the right value to our users. And so we've created a curatorial board. Now, the curatorial board is a combination of curators, collectors, art influencers, and really people that understand the African market, are experts in this field. They understand the artists, they understand the art itself and the business of the art. And they come together to advise us. They govern our portfolio development in terms of the kind of works we get, the arts we bring to our users. And they also sit on the conversation around the reserve price a work comes into the app. So take, for example, we are listing a work from, say, an Agoso in Ghana, for example, right? Once that work is listed, it goes to our curatorial board. Our curatorial board will review it. And part of what we do to enable them and give them the right level of information is that we would get past data, right? So how has Augusta performed previously? What was the last work he sold? Similar works to this size, the style. What has that been like in the past? So we take past data and we pull that together for the curatorial board. We also take all the different information around the artist. Where have they exhibited? What is their influence in the world right now? What's the cultural relevance? We take all of that information, we make it available to the curatorial board, and then they obviously apply their own knowledge, their experience, and agree on the reserve price that goes out to the app. Now, what the reserve price simply means is that for every auction, this is the price that we can't go lower than. Now, we can go higher, which means people can bid higher if they want to bid, but that is the starting price. And it also means that is what we as a company value to pay for that work if we're to purchase it outright directly. So our curatorial board plays a very important part in this. So it also creates for consistency, for fairness, equity, and also make sure that we're not like creating something very, I guess, out of scope with the external market as well. So our curatorial board plays that critical role for us. We use a lot of information, a lot of past data, and then obviously their experience, understanding of the art, the style, the medium, all of those things come together to fix the reserve price.
Thank you for that. So you've detailed the process and how your curatorial board work together to set a reserve price for African art. And recently, we've seen an increased interest in African arts from major establishments such as Sotheby's and a whole host of other organizations. What impact do you believe that has had on African art and the valuation?
Well, I think it's had a really good impact for sure, because obviously they have contributed to elevating African art, also elevating it not just on a global stage, but also to their collectors who probably would previously collect only a certain kind of art. Also, it's helped in shining more light on some of the amazing artists coming out from Africa and the works that they've created, as well as some of the works that people just had in their house and did not even understand the value of those works. You know, there's some collectors you meet now and they tell you, oh, my father had this, and they give it to them. There are people who didn't even understand what they have.
Yes, very true.
And so all of this has kind of broadened, I would say, the understanding and making more people aware. It also now has helped push that conversation forward around how do we actually ensure that the African artists are also making and are profiting from their work as much as possible. So I would say, yeah, it is great to see that most of all these big auction houses are creating an African space within their structure to focus on African arts, African artists, to create an avenue for the works to be auctioned, for people to see them, especially with some of the museums internationally, right? They're creating more spaces for African works, which is really important because the works need to be seen. You need to see the works so that people know the artist, so that you create value for the artist. So all of these things are all very well welcomed. I keep saying that, sometimes people ask, oh, does ARTSPLIT replace this? It's not about replacing anything, right? Because we all need to almost come at this from different angles to consolidate and truly build and elevate African arts and the artists themselves. So I would say, yes, they have contributed to what we see today as that value, knowledge, exposure of African art, and which is good. We will take that as well as being critical in the conversations of the future and how we continue to expand African art.
Thank you for that. So you've detailed how interest from major auction houses have helped raise awareness and opened much needed conversations. So in your opinion, what has been the catalyst or driver behind the recent increase in interest of African art?
That's a really good question. What's been the catalyst? I don't know if there's one thing I can lay my finger on.
It's a multiple of different factors.
Yes, it is. I think it's different things that have come together to really put that focus on African culture and in extension on African art. And whether that's through the movies like Wakanda or through the music like Burna Boy, I guess there's this appetite right now for almost everything African and the excellence that it brings through.
Very true.
And definitely you can see that apply to all parts of African arts. So there's so much. And there's been people who've been working hard behind the scene, right? Who's probably done a lot of work that we are seeing now in terms of it showing up. But I would say more generally for me, I think the opportunity around the broader African conversation and the experience of African culture is also being a key catalyst in the focus of African art. And as more people are embracing it and more conversations are happening and more people are experiencing it, it obviously expands and increases the desire and the need for some of these works among other collectors globally.
So, with this emerging interest in African art, from your perspective or what you're doing, who are the main buyers? Are we seeing more African buyers, old and young?
Yeah, we have our collectors, like people who obviously have collected for years, they're quite elderly in this space. But also interesting, we're seeing emerging collectors, so young collectors. I call it new money, which is quite interesting. Even like with, artists, musicians, tech guys, like people who are just like getting their hands on wealth. You can see a lot of them are actually growing the interest of collecting. And again, is that balance of for the joy and the love of art, but also balancing it out as an investment form, right? Because art, if you look at it over time, the value of art grows.
Very true.
Consistently. And it actually does outperform a lot of your kind of traditional assets. So it is quite a balance for some people. But I would say who's collecting more? I'm not sure if I can truly answer that question. But I would say there's a lot of data that's showing young collectors emerging, more young people being interested in art, understanding the value of art, the part it plays within the society, the part it plays as a culture carrier, but also the ability for it to expand beyond the space where the art comes from.
Yes.
So there's more recognition of that. And I think that's quite interesting. And a lot of young emerging collectors. So if we look at some of our users right now within our app, it is quite young collectors. So we have quite a big chunks of our users from that age of 20, 21 to like 30, 35, right? Who are quite big on splits, who feel like, oh, this is my entry route into collecting art, starting with co-ownership. And then you see those same people actually buying outright art from emerging artists from our open market. So it's a good entry point for them to start, right? You come in with the big value art and they see some of these works. Like right now, we have some of those works up on the app, 2 of them that currently exhibit at Hourglass Gallery in Lagos. So it means people can actually go see this work physically. So you can actually like invest and buy splits into these works and then go take a look at it, because that's it. It's physical work. And they start to appreciate the works and appreciate the art in itself, and then explore the open markets for emerging artists where they can buy works with less entry barriers when it comes to price. We see that kind of trend happening within the app, and you can see it as well generally, right?
Yeah.
With younger people being more interested. If you go to the art fairs, there are loads of young people showing up, and that's a good thing. It's a really good thing.
Oh, definitely.
And it also means that people were putting more value on art, which, previously, if you probably had told your parents you wanted to be an artist, you wouldn't be the shining star of the family. But now people know that it is a valid career, and it is quite an important one within a society.
Fantastic, fantastic. So, do you believe we're seeing a change towards how arts are perceived or prioritized in African culture or society?
I think so. I think we are definitely. Obviously, there's more work in that space. And that's because somehow art has been this space for the ultra wealthy and super rich and highly cultured people. So it does make sense that people generally out of that space or those groups of people haven't given it much thought or put much value in it or think it's that important, right? Because sometimes I still get people asking me the question, which art? Is it like the art I can just buy from the market? You know? Like, why is that $350,000? I can just go and buy it in the market, under the bridge. I can just go and
I
buy
guess
it.
it is a fair question.
It is a very fair question. And nothing says that the art you get from under the bridge in Lagos isn't art, right?
Yes.
But again, back to that conversation of what is the uniqueness of the art? What is the storytelling, the style, like the individuality of that work, that artist, and that story they're telling? That gives value to that work. It's not just a broad print of shades of leaves or something. Those things are important. And also how the artists have grown over time, the technique that they've applied to the work, to how their work has been developed. All of those things give value to that piece of work. So yeah, it's it's an interesting one, but that's what gives it its value.
Fantastic. We've discussed the value of art and the changing perception of art in Africa, which I guess can all be quite subjective. But from your opinion, what do you believe is the true power of African art?
One of the things I truly find fascinating, right, is how art can carry a story and can truly hold meaning over years. One of the works that I found the story very striking for me is Foley by Damascus.
Okay.
Now, this work, it talks about the Civil War, right? And
Okay.
my mom tells us that story as well because she grew up in that time in Nigeria and she obviously lived through it. And you hear all of that story and you understand what people went through. And it's a really striking piece of work. And I think if you ever go online, check it out. The story of that work will remain even after time. The artist is dead, right? That moment in time has also passed, right? It is captured in books and obviously it's being taught. But that work has traveled the world and has told that story. And over time, more than most of the people who are alive will or could have. And I think for me, that's the power of art. It has the ability to expand beyond its space from where it comes from in a way that is really striking and holds the culture and the power of a people or of a country just by something that is visual. And that connection is very individual for each person because both of us could be looking at a piece of art and we would have different connections and different
Yes.
experiences. And sometimes I know people always be like, oh, come on.
It's very true.
It truly is. I probably used to be one of those people, but I go to some art galleries or when I love art fairs just because of the multi pieces of work you get to see by different artists, very varied, and just the emotions you can experience from one stall to the other. I think that is just truly striking. For me, the biggest power, I think, with art, it's his ability to capture history, hold it, and have it remain over time, even after you're gone and after we all are gone. It's still there.
Thank you for sharing that. You fully demonstrated the true power of art, not just African art in general. So I guess if we go back to ARTSPLIT is a startup that sits in a very unique intersection between arts and technology. And with rising interest in art, we're also seeing rising interest in African startups and increased amounts of funding flowing to African startups. So I was curious to know, are startups in your space also seeing increased interest from investors?
Yeah, I would say yes. Like, I'm sure you probably have seen all of the data, right? The amount of investment being made in tech startups in
Yes.
Africa as a whole. There is still a lot that technology can do within the African market. And obviously, as more structure is being put in place and more from a government point of view and society generally, you can see that there's an opportunity for more technology to help enable everyday living within the communities. So I would say yes. We've had a good number of people that have believed in our story and believe in the potential of what we could do with ArtSplit and have been part of this journey with us and invested in us. Generally, the answer for me would be yes. It is a learning curve for me, for sure, around how you have those conversations with potential investors, how you sell your story, how you bring
Yes.
to life the opportunity within your business, especially when you're doing it for the first time, right? You just got to learn through it.
Yes.
I'm also quite fortunate to have people around me who've been entrepreneurs for years and understand the ropes way better than I do. So I would say yes, the opportunities are there. There's obviously more spaces within Africa, startups generally, that we probably need to put a bit more structure in within that, even within our countries, right? The more structure that's in place, the better it is to actually flourish and the better the potential of those startups to actually succeed.
So I think it's clear to say that the increased interest in investment demonstrates the value that you as ArtSplit provide. So I was hoping you could tell us what value you believe ArtSplit provides or offers to African artists.
Yeah, we believe that at the end of the day, all said and done, what we want to really ensure is that we have significantly contributed in elevating the value of African art and artists.
Brilliant.
The way we've crafted the about us is everything leads to that point, right? To the point where more people are understanding the value and then are putting their money behind it. More people now have access but at a smaller scale and at a larger scale if they want to, through co-ownership. And obviously, as we see more of the transactions that happen within our users as they buy and they sell their works, we would obviously contribute towards those data indexes around the valuation of works. Because one of the interesting things I find is we have a piece of work that had come in and the artist was asking for, say, X amount, right? And we had that artist already in our app. They had gone through an auction, but the work wasn't through the artist. It was listed. So it was a secondary sale. So someone had bought the work, I guess, previously and then listed the work on our app. And the value at which the work has been traded on our app now is like about 10% higher than what the artist was valuing the work as. So it tells you that data points become very important when you start having that conversation of value. So how are people actually trading the work? How much are people selling it for? How much are people buying it for? And those are those important indexes that then feed into those valuations that we keep talking about. What is the past data? These start becoming part of the past data. So we are hoping that we become part of those conversations and part of those inputs that then determines the value of African works. And there's so many iconic works out there. We're excited for what we have so far, but even more excited for what we're going to build over time by giving people the platform to list their works, either in full or in part. Nothing should stop you from being able to take value from your work, but still enjoy the work. So you can list 10% of the work if you need some liquidity, still own 90%, and still have the opportunity through a lease auction to have that work physically in your space, which you will not be able to do normally, because if you needed some liquidity, you would have to sell off the work fully. So just being able to create those opportunities, I think, is quite important for us. And all this then kind of feed into what our overall goal and aim is, which is to elevate African art and artists, introduce emerging artists to new global audiences, give the opportunities for our users to buy work directly from emerging artists, and they get paid instantly wherever they are in the world. So I think those things for us is what drives us at the end of the day.
Beautiful, beautiful. So you've detailed that the value you want to provide is to significantly elevate the value of African art and artists. So if we look at that from the other end of the spectrum, what value does ARTSPLIT provide to collectors of African art?
It comes at the different levels of collection. So for a collector, I talked about your ability to list your work either in full or list in parts based on what it is you require, the value of liquidity that you require, and still have access to that work physically. Also, for emerging collectors, right, is the ability to start your collector journey through co-ownership of works, and then also leveraging the lease auction to have physical custody of these works if you would want that. So I think those things are quite valuable. And it's also giving collectors access to really varied, iconic African works. Our goal is to truly be Pan-African as much as possible and have some really strong, iconic artists from across Africa have their works on our app. That's where we want to get to. So providing that platform to collectors, I think, is quite critical because it gives them access to all of these amazing works. I know I did meet a collector from South Africa who didn't know a lot about, some of the artists from Western Africa. They didn't really know the Benewongu or your Grillos or, but these are really strong, iconic masters that have huge international presence. So it does also tell you that there is space for also exposing African collectors to a broader range of African works and creating the connection for them with other collectors by leveraging one single platform.
So you've detailed now and during our conversation how through ARTSPLIT you've almost like democratized the ownership of art so people can co-own a piece of art. So looking at the co-ownership, how do you go about deciding who gets to house or keep the physical artwork?
I feel like this is probably our most asked question. Like, who gets?
I'm glad I've asked.
Where does the work stay? No,
Yes.
I'm serious. It truly is. And I think because of the fact that people are quite particular about that art shouldn't be hidden, right? We shouldn't just have it in the vault locked away somewhere. And so the way our model works, just to give a bit of an explanation to your users that might be listening, is when an artwork comes into our platform, say the value of that work is at $100,000.
Yes.
We break that down into 100,000 splits or units, and then people can buy into the work by splits or by units. So you can say you want to buy 500 splits or 10,000 splits or 50,000 splits, whatever that is. And obviously, the amount of splits that you bid for would then signify your percentage of ownership based on of that work at the end of the auction. And so the auction kicks off and everybody would have the opportunity to go in and bid. So like right now, we've got Yusuf Grillo Ayo and George Pember's Between Life and Death currently up for split auctions. And so people are putting in their bids and they are putting in how many splits they want. Now, what it does is that work that is $100,000, it becomes $1 for a split. So you can take your $10 and just buy 10 splits and have ownership of 10 splits, right? And if at the end of the auction you win, you get those splits. That same work, because we've then created co-ownership, and we can't divvy it all up to 100 people or 50 people or 200 people, right? To kind of get the work. What we then do is have a lease auction. And what that lease auction does is that whoever wins that auction would have the opportunity to have the work physically in their space for a period of 2 years. So the work isn't locked away somewhere. It is being appreciated and it is valued within a space. Now, these works are important. and they're iconic. So we do quite have a lot of like guardrails around the work. So we have insurance. Those spaces before it goes up are checked. We've got security deposits that covers for the period of the time the work is there, which is obviously paid back. So we have all of those things that we've put in place to help secure the work for the period that it is within the lease. So what happens to the work? The work goes on a lease auction, and either it can be won by a corporate, so say maybe a company for their workspace, or maybe a hotel, or it could be won by an individual. And we are having the conversation as well on how we work with some international museums to have some of these works for that period, to give it the visibility and that value as well. So that's what happens to the work.
Awesome. So through owning a piece of art, I'm curious to know, can people actually make a profit from co-owning pieces of art?
Yeah, yes, you can. So in the ARTSPLIT app, once you get your split, your first earning comes from the lease. Now, remember the work goes on lease and then the auction goes on. And then say someone gets it for $5,000 or $1,000 or $2,000 or whatever that is. That income is then shared by all the owners of the work based on their percentage of ownership. So once you buy splits into a work, your first earning always comes from the lease of that work. Now, secondly, because obviously you own those splits and you manage it within your portfolio in the app, you can decide to buy or sell the pieces that you have within the app. We have other users, so you can sell to other users within the app at the value that you desire. It's not mandated by us, so you decide the value you want to sell. And you can afford to maybe buy low in the auction, which is like the primary market, the entry point, and sell high afterwards and make a profit from that as well.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. I mean, this sounds extremely exciting. So for people who are listening, who want to invest in African art in the future, where would you recommend in terms of where should they look to start their African arts journey?
Well, there's a lot to start and to get from. I would say if you are starting to collect, right, you want to collect works. Being a collector is an interesting journey. Yes. But first thing is understanding your budget, right?
Yes.
You need to define your budget because art is a very expensive space to play in.
I'm still defining my budget.
Exactly. So you need to define your budget, understand what it is that you can afford. And if you really want to go strongly into art collection, you also need to determine what it is you want. Like what speaks to you? What do you feel like you would want to have an array of in terms of either the story that connects you to those works or to that artist? And that could really help you start thinking of the kind of works, where you find those works. You could also just go out to galleries and see what is out there, see some of the works that you might connect with so that you might like. Again, be very exploratory at the beginning. That's what I think. And kind of understand, what styles and mediums you seem to be drawn to. And that's a good way to start. And then you can either buy directly from a gallery or you can follow some of the auction houses. And there are smaller auction houses as well. So you can explore different routes. That's one way to do it. Or you can say, I can't define my budget enough to be able to start collecting fully. And you really can start collecting in splits on ARTSPLIT. So you can start with co-ownership as you build capacity to be able to buy your first piece of work. You can leverage your splits by either selling to then buy your first piece of collection, or you can decide to have a portfolio of co-owned works and enjoy your own journey that way. So there are different ways, I would say, to get started.
Brilliant. So you've explained where people should look and explore to familiarize themselves with African art. In terms of African art and what's happening in that space, what current trends in African art are you excited about that people should look out for?
Current trends. Let me put it this way. There are different trends and there are different types of art currently right now all around the space. I probably have a very different taste from my peers.
Very true.
Is what I would say. I told you one of my favorite pieces of work is Foley. Foley is a very long time ago that it was made. But there's so much there. I think for me, I am really drawn by a story of a work. And so I am that person that reads the story. When you see an artwork and they write the story and you see the editorial, that's kind of where I go to first, because that's what draws me, that connection to a piece of work. But I know right now portraiture is quite huge in the space, especially in the contemporary space. So I would say arts is an interesting space that stays with you your whole life, because you find out that when you start the journey, it evolves over time. I would say really think about what you connect with as you explore the art space. The good thing about ARTSPLIT is you can go and look at some works. It's like a virtual gallery, isn't it?
Yes.
You can go and see some of those works and say, and that could start giving you a sense of what it is that you might be interested in. So I would say start from there, see what draws you, because you might not necessarily be in tune with the new trends. So I wouldn't always go through a trend route, but always think about what it is. I find it fascinating, some works. Like I remember the first time I saw an Abodia. First, I was taken aback. Like I was like, what is happening? What is happening with this work? I remember reading a story about some of his works, and it flipped for me in terms of how I saw his works going forward. So I would say take some time to just really see what connects you and then explore it from there. And it's really an interesting space. There is so much diversity and beauty right now in the African art space. So explore that and kind of move along with your interest and passion.
Thank you for that advice. So, as someone who is fully embedded in Africa's art space scene, what does the future look like for African arts and artists? Where do you see African art in, say, 5 years' time?
Wow. Where do I see it? I would say I truly hope to see massive growth in this space. In 5 years' time, obviously, I know for a fact, that the market size would have grown. But I think what would be really important is to see a huge percentage of that market value come back to Africa, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So that would be like both in terms of value for the artists, so them really profiting from their works, but also in terms of the value of collectors, more collectors being quite active within the African space as well. So I truly believe that in 5 years' time, we would see a stronger structure around the African arts market. And that is actually going to be quite beneficial, because then artists have more say and they obviously have more economic power within the art space. But also it's just to see more people value those works, right? Especially more young people, which we're seeing the trend towards. So we'll be more of that. And obviously more amazing works coming out.
Thank you for sharing that. Yes, I'm very optimistic about the African art space, and it's something that I have a passion for. Obviously, I think since having earlier conversations with yourself, it's something that I do want to explore further and get more accustomed to more African artists and just to see what is out there, because it's a very exciting space. So if we look closer to home, where do you see yourself and ARTSPLIT in 5 years' time?
First, in 5 years' time, I would really want ARTSPLIT to be a significant influence within the African art space. We believe that we are adding to the really relevant conversation that needs to happen around access within African art. And that is truly important in developing the African art market. So we would love to create more access, hopefully have nothing less than 500,000 people on our app. Very ambitious, but we believe that, we'll get there. We are currently at almost 15,000 people. So we're slowly getting there.
No, definitely.
Yeah, in our last 8 months, right?
Yes.
But also importantly is just the conversation, creating more access for people through co-ownership. Also just evolving, I guess, the alternative art space, right? Because the beautiful thing about the technology we've created is the ability for it to split, which is basically what we're doing with art, right? But this can be applied to other forms of arts like music and so the African art space is an interesting one, and so would like to see ARTSPLIT truly being a key player generally within that art space and evolving not just from artworks but to other forms of art and creating the ability for co-ownership and leveraging it as an alternative source of investment. So I think that's 5 years for us down the line.
You do have a very unique position in the African art space and are doing some amazing and unique work to elevate African art and African artists. So I think the future is definitely bright for ARTSPLIT. So yes.
Yeah, it truly is. And I was telling someone, with COVID and everything that's happened, but yet in 2021, there was a huge surge in African art creatives, right? In terms of just works that were sold. It was over 40%. So you can imagine after the years we've had with COVID, what that looks like. So, it gives you hope to say the market is a really strong market and it definitely has huge potentials that can be explored.
Quote of the week.
As people, we often have quotes, mantras, proverbs, or affirmations that keep us going when times are challenging and when times are good. Do you have one that you can share with us today?
Oh, cool. You know what? That's such an interesting one. I can hear my mom speaking.
Beautiful.
I think like a lot of probably African parents did this, right?
Yes.
Where your mom takes the broom and tells you can't break the broom, right?
Yes.
Because there's a whole lot of it. Because I feel like everyone's mom probably did that at some point. But I have to say that has truly stuck with me over time. Just that power of unity.
Yes.
How you take the broom and you can't break the broom because it's really strong. It has all of these individual pieces in it. But then you just take one of it, the stick, and it just it breaks very easily.
Yes.
And I find it even more relevant now, one, as I'm a mom and from my own kind of unit in a way, right? And what it means for us to be together and work together and try and teach my kids, as much as you hate each other in this moment, you got to love each other. You just got both of you.
Yes.
But also as we've created this wonderful company called ARTSPLIT, and we're seeing all this amazing talent come in to kind of help us push this journey further. It becomes quite relevant. We're stronger together than we are apart.
Amazing. Brilliant. And as we're coming to the end of the conversation, I was hoping you can give us some closing remarks, final calls to action for people who are interested in ARTSPLIT and also interested in African arts in general.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. It's very easy to get started. So please check out ARTSPLIT on your Apple Store, Google Play Store, download ARTSPLIT, get started, sign up, join the new art economy today, as we say. But even more importantly, let us know how you're experiencing it. I love getting feedback from our users. I love when they give us ideas or say, that's not working. I truly love that interaction with users and connecting with people as they give us feedback and how they experience the app. So please go download the app and let us know how you're experiencing it. We truly want to collaborate and bring amazing works to people to experience through ARTSPLIT. So that's us. Join us in our new journey, I guess, and be part of it. Be part of the new art economy.
Brilliant. Thank you, Onyinye. That has been a fresh and fascinating conversation. Thank you for joining me on the podcast today. You know, as an African art lover, it's great to have you on the show and just to understand a lot more about the work that you're doing and also to reignite my passion for African art. Since our first conversation, I've actually started doing some research, looking at new artists, exploring kind of new forms of art which I wasn't really familiar with before. So definitely I hope people who are listening have also had that urge to look a bit deeper and explore African art as well. So thank you for your time.
All right, thank you so much. Nice to talk to you again.
I'm sure we will speak soon.
Talk later. Bye.
Thank you to everyone who has listened and stayed tuned to the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share, or tell a friend about it. You can also rate, review us in Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcast. Thank you and see you next week for the Unlocking Africa podcast.